Welcome to the Extra Mile podcast for bar exam takers. There are no traffic jams along the Extra Mile when you're studying for your bar exam. And now, your host, Jackson Mumey, owner of the Celebration Bar Review.
Well, hey everybody, welcome to episode 132 of the Extra Mile podcast for bar exam takers. This is Jackson. So pleased that you're with us today. Thanks for spending part of your day and time with me to talk about and consider the bar exam. And it is coming up fast for those of you taking the February 2017 exam. If you're listening to this episode about the date we release, you're going to be just a little under 2 weeks until your test. We wish you all well. And we've got a special message today. I'm going to be talking about keeping perspective with 2 weeks to go, so I hope you'll stick around for that message. Now, for those of you that are not taking the exam in 2 weeks, well, take a deep breath and feel pretty good about yourselves today. But I want to invite all of you who are not taking the exam right now to join me in a couple of weeks on February 16th, that's a Thursday, at 3 p.m. Eastern for a special live webinar called How to Make the Next Bar Exam Your Last Bar Exam. These are the 4 powerful steps that you need to pass the bar, guaranteed. We're going to look at those steps. We're going to look at the journey that you need to take. We're going to give you information that you can use right away to help your studies and learn how to make your studies much more effective and to ultimately pass the exam. Now, it's free to join me on this webinar on Thursday the 16th. All you have to do is go to our website at celebrationbarreview.com, click on the button to reserve your seat for the 16th. That's 3 p.m. Eastern, 12 noon Pacific, and join me for this 90-minute presentation. Now, if you don't want to wait that long, and I can certainly understand that, or maybe Thursday doesn't work for you, then just scroll down that same page a little bit further. You'll see an on-demand version of the same information, and you can set up your own schedule and watch at your own convenience. So either way, I hope you'll join us. If you're on the live webinar, you have the advantage of being able to ask me questions, and I always think that's where the magic happens. But either way, I hope you'll join us and be part of that special opportunity to figure out how to make the next bar exam your last bar exam. Now, let's turn to our topic today, because I know that those of you taking the exam in a couple of weeks are probably chomping at the bit and saying, well, look, I don't have much time, so I'm going to try and get right into this. But I do want to point out to you that there are a couple of episodes we've done previously on the Extra Mile podcast that I think are really relevant if you're looking for more information about how to approach this last period of time. If you check out episode 65, that's 065, that's a message about power and takes a story from the Old Testament, the story of Gideon, and I think you'd find it an interesting story. It's one of my most popular episodes, and I think it's a good one for 2 weeks before the exam. And the other episode I would recommend to you is episode 95, 095. This is a look at how your shadow deceives you. It's kind of a look at Plato's allegory of the man in the cave and why you can get sort of locked in at this late stage and lose sight of reality. And so if that's something that you think is happening just a little bit, check out episode 95. And we'll put the links to both of those episodes in our show notes. And on our show notes, as always, you have the opportunity to subscribe to the podcast series, or you can just go to our website at celebrationbarreview.com, click on the podcast link, and you will see all of the prior episodes since the beginning of the series, along with the opportunity to subscribe. And you can subscribe in iTunes or in iHeartRadio, whatever works best for you. And so we'd love to have you as a regular listener to the episodes and to the podcast. Well, my title for today's episode is Keeping Perspective 2 weeks before the bar exam. And boy, perspective is everything, isn't it? I mean, it's tough to keep that perspective with everything that's going on around us in the world, in politics, in sports. It just seems like everything's coming at you really fast right now. Plus, there's a bar exam. Now, I've had some conversations with some of my students in the last week or so in which I've said to them, look, don't pay much attention to what's going on with the protests and the Super Bowl and the, this and this and this. And they go, Super Bowl? Protests? What do you mean? They have no idea. And I think that might be taking it a little bit to the extreme. But basically, my advice up to this point has been to keep your head down and keep focused on the exam, at least for the next couple of weeks. And I think all things in moderation, but if you're doing that, that's a pretty good idea. Now, I have 5 specific tips to help you keep perspective in this last period of time. And if you're thinking to yourself, well, I don't need perspective, I just need to know the hearsay rules. Well, really, if you're going to learn the law most effectively, having the right perspective in these last 2 weeks can make all the difference between passing and failing, because it's rarely a matter of learning something new or adding something more to your arsenal. The truth is, most of you have got most of the information that you're going to have for the exam already. So if you haven't been studying and you just started, then stop this podcast and go study. But for everybody else, if you've been doing your studying and you've been working progressively and steadily, I think now the mental aspect, the perspective aspect, becomes really important in order to get the result that you want. So I hope you'll stick with me to hear these 5 things. Let's jump right in. The first way I think that you can keep perspective 2 weeks before the bar exam is to recognize the simple metaphysical truth that 2 weeks is a very long time. Let me say it again. 2 weeks is a very long time. I know that for many of you, it seems like the exam is right now, it's right here, you're going to go. But you're not going to the exam tomorrow. Even if you're traveling a long distance, you are not going to the exam today or tomorrow. It is still 2 weeks away. And in those 2 weeks, you can accomplish an enormous amount. Now, to be clear, if you haven't been studying, then you cannot cram for 2 weeks and be successful on this test. I'll just say that, and I know that makes me unpopular in some circles, but that's the truth. That's the empirical data, is that people who study for a minimum number of hours typically fail the exam. On the other hand, if you've been diligent enough to be studying for a period of time and listening to these podcasts as an example, then I know you've been working, and at this stage, you don't need to be thinking about, I need to cram much more information into my brain. On the other hand, knowing that you've still got 2 weeks, if that is a long time, well, what do you do with it? I think the goal is to get better every day, to take one step, one study session, and say, I want that to be better than yesterday's study session. I recommend to my students that they work in 3-hour study blocks right now. 3 hours in the morning, take a lunch break, 3 hours in the afternoon, take a dinner break, and if you're really struggling and really have a lot to get done, take another 3-hour study session in the evening after dinner. If you don't need that, don't do it. But in any event, so we're talking about 6, maybe 9 hours a day if you're in full-time study mode. If you make each study session, the goal of each study session, to simply be better than you were yesterday, that's a lot. That's a lot to accomplish. But what some people try to do is to start all over again and study everything. They try to learn all of the material for a second or a third or a fourth time. It's not necessary. If you plan to make flashcards and to memorize, and you think that that's what you're going to do for the next 2 weeks, that is a fool's game. It does not work, and you will not be successful doing that. And so the key here is to look at what you don't know, what you need to work on, and put your efforts there. If you do that, 2 weeks can be really effective, because in that period of time, you can identify particular questions or problems or topics or skills that you need work on, and you can continue to improve those. And by doing that, I think you'll see amazing results rather than this very diffuse general cram mentality that people get into with 2 weeks to go. Now, there's a very famous story about how one can look at this period of time and the hopefulness that you bring to it. I've heard the story told a couple of ways. One of the ways it's told is a story about the Sultan of Baghdad and his love of horses. And then there's a more Americanized English version with Henry VIII. And I like the Henry VIII version, not because I've got anything against the Sultan of Baghdad, but it actually fits my paradigm and our time frame a little better. So I'm going to tell you the Henry VIII version, but I want to acknowledge that there is a completely different version with the same punchline. But here we go. In any event, there was a man who was condemned to die by Henry VIII, and he knew that the king loved his horses. And so as this prisoner is being brought out to be sentenced to death, he says to the king, Your Highness, I know you love your horses, and I have a special gift. I can teach your horse to talk. And King Henry says, well, you have 15 days until you're scheduled to die. And the man says, well, in 15 days, I can teach your horse to talk. And if so, will you spare my life? The king says, sure, go ahead. I'd love to see what happens. Well, they take the prisoner back into the barracks, and his fellow prisoners are laughing at him, and they say, oh, you're such a fool. And the prisoner replies, well, 15 days is a very long time. In 15 days, the king may die. Or in 15 days, I may die. Or in 15 days, the horse may talk. Now, I love that story because the optimism of the idea that the horse may talk in 15 days, I think is something that bar takers can really grab hold of. Because for some of you, it looks like it's going to be an uphill battle to pass the bar. And if you believe that it's possible, that you could pass, that you could make it work, then you have the hope, I think, that you need to use these last 2 weeks. But notice that it's not just the hope of being successful, it's doing something with it. It's taking the action. It's taking the step of trying to get ready. If you just sit around and think to yourself, well, I've got 8 days, I've got 15 days, now I've got 14, now I've got 13, and you're not really doing anything with that, then obviously it's not a long enough time for you, and you ought to consider deferring to the next exam. So the first way I think you keep perspective is you recognize that 2 weeks is still a very long time until the exam. The second thing that I would suggest in terms of keeping perspective is to recognize that nothing has changed. Nothing has changed. Oh, this one really gets to bar takers. I cannot tell you how many times in the 50 plus exams that I've mentored students through over the last 25 years, how many times I have heard from students in this last 2 week period that they suddenly have heard about a case or a ruling or a decision or something happening in the contemporary world, and they're freaked out because, is it going to be on the exam? Well, folks, I hate to break this to you, but the bar exams you're taking in February were the backup bar exams for July 2016. Let that sink in for just a minute. The test you're taking was the backup security version of the test if something happened to July 2016's exam. And in the same way, the backup version for the February 2017 exam will be the exam given in, that's right, July 2017. Amazing, isn't it? You see, the tests are written far in advance, far in advance. And I think this mythology about the examiner sitting there every night watching the nightly news and then writing test questions, or reading the advance sheets from the courts and then writing test questions, well, that's just ridiculous. It doesn't happen. And so I know that some of you who are totally immersed in the day-to-day activities of politics and law, certainly in these days, have plenty to talk about. And so if you're expecting a question on executive orders, or the relationship between the different branches of government, or the ability of Congress and the Senate to advise and consent, those are all great topics, but your exam was written before anyone ever imagined that a TV reality host could become the President of the United States. Trust me. It was not in their brains. It was not on their radar. And therefore, none of that will be testable on this exam. Now, in the odd, bizarre circumstance in which, let's say, you had a constitutional law question, multistate or essay, that in some way it touched or infringed on something that was ripped from the headlines, as they say on Law and Order, then make your best guess about it. Deal with it as you think the settled law was, not the law that's unsettled today. That is to say, don't try to interpret what's going on in the last 24 or 48 hours and put it on the bar exam. Use what you already learned and what you know. When you've got that perspective, then you don't have to worry about the craziness that's going on around you right now. There is no sudden lurch in the exam. It did not suddenly morph or change into something different. It did not completely upend what you know. That didn't happen. Bar examiners hate change. They hate unsettled law. They hate unsettled rules. The things that they want to test are the settled rules. That's why the basics of each subject continue to be the most important ones to study. So as you study 2 weeks before the bar exam, let me tell you, don't be out on the fringe thinking about the latest and craziest things that are happening in the law. Stay right in the core, in the heart of the subject, and you're going to be much better off. Okay. Perspective number 3 that I think you have to have. Oh, some of you are going to hate me so badly after this one. Well, somebody has to say it to you. You are not the center of the universe. Oh, I know. How could I be so cruel and heartless? Don't I know that you're taking a bar exam in 2 weeks? And why don't I be kinder to you like everyone else should be kinder to you? Don't they know? Don't they? Don't they? No, they don't. And here's the cold water on this. They don't care. I mean, they really don't care. I put a link in our show notes to one of my favorite videos, music videos, probably of all time. And I'm not a big country music fan, but Brad Paisley, the country music singer, did a video a few years ago called Celebrity. And it's a catchy little tune. It'll stick in your brain. But the reason I love the video so much is that he uses Jason Alexander and William Shatner in the video. And they are hysterically funny. And in one part of this video in which Paisley's talking about or daydreaming about what it would mean to be a celebrity, that he is the center of the universe, in essence. He uses these examples of Jason Alexander standing in line at a Starbucks to get his coffee because he is a celebrity and the coffee is made incorrectly. And Alexander throws this enormous temper tantrum. Now, I spend enough time in Starbucks to tell you that this happens more frequently than you might imagine for lots of reasons. But it is absolutely hysterical to watch someone who thinks that they should be treated very specially just completely lose it. And if you want a little laugh, check out the video. It's great. It's a funny one. But my point is really serious. With 2 weeks to go, you probably feel like your bar exam is the most important thing in the universe. And here's the reality. It's not even close. It's not even on the list. It's not even on the list of lists of lists. You don't count. Nobody cares. Really, nobody cares. Oh, I know. You could go to Above the Law or some blog and you could see all of these things. You could even put in the Twitter hashtags about bar exam and see all the things that are there and assume that that's the entire world. But trust me, it is not. The world is consumed with other things right now. In politics, in international relations, in sports, in entertainment. I got to tell you, and this is sort of the contemporary moment, right? Beyonce announced that she's having twins, and she had, 6 million likes on Instagram? 6 million for twins? Post on Instagram that you're taking the bar exam and see how many likes you get. I'm guessing it will be something less than 6 million. You see, the problem here is that we become self-absorbed. And if this is something that's really been bothering you, that you don't think people really understand how important this is to you. And I understand why you might feel that way. Check out episode 95 that I talked about earlier, about how your shadow can deceive you. You become really immersed in this notion that you are the most important thing and this bar exam is most important. It is the most important thing in your universe, to be sure. But because it doesn't even register on anyone else's, you need to take the perspective and say, you know what? It really doesn't matter to my family quite so much, or to my employer, or to the people in traffic that cut me off, or to the barista, or to the customer service person that I'm talking to, or whatever it might be. And you need to remember that it's all about perspective and it's all about relative importance. And when you keep that perspective, it's a whole lot easier to put up with the craziness that's going to happen. Let me be clear. There will be things that happen at the bar exam. There will be mistakes in the hotels. There will be problems with proctors. There will be technical problems. There will be all manner of things that happen. This is a February exam that's given in cold weather places like New York and Chicago and Detroit and Cleveland, and pick your cold weather city, and things happen. Travel will be difficult. Clearly travel's difficult if you're trying to come in from out of the country right now. You have to keep perspective through all of this. If you let these things enrage you and send you lurching off into, I've used lurch twice now, that's weird, send you off into the wrong area, then I think what's going to happen is that you become so freaked out that you lose your sense of proportion, you lose your ability to act rationally and to give yourself the best chance to be successful in the exam. Look, do something nice for somebody else today, or do something nice periodically for other people. Do something that gets you out of your own head, out of your own life, out of your own world. I have a student who told me that she volunteers in the Stephen ministry at her church. That's a ministry that meets with people who are in need, and she helps with a youth group. This is someone who's studying for the bar. They're busy. They're got a lot on their plate, but they're still finding time to do this volunteer work. And I think that's really important, because when you do that, what you're doing is getting outside of your cave, outside of your world, seeing that there's a bigger world out there, and giving yourself the opportunity to be part of that. It really is a good perspective builder. And frankly, it'll make the studies you do much more effective if you're not fuming and insanely crazy, which is what a lot of bar takers become at this point, about things that are really ultimately pretty trivial. So, you're not the center of the universe. Hate to break that bad news to you. All right, perspective number 4. We've got a couple more to go. Perspective number 4 is a truth as well. And the truth is you already have everything that you need. You already have it. Look, if you have been studying, you already know most everything that you need to be successful on the exam. You will not add so much material over the next 2 weeks that it will make a qualitative difference on the exam. Now, I'm not contradicting what I said in number 1 about 2 weeks being a very long time. It is a long time, and you can make a lot of improvement. But the core of what you know, you gained in law school, you gained in practice, you gained in the bar review, you've gained it over time and in life experience, and that isn't going to change. You're not going to suddenly lose all of that. You're not going to suddenly have to start over from scratch. You will not have the equivalent of a lobotomy and have to start with nothing in your brain. So don't behave like that. You already have everything that you need. Now, I have this conversation with my students a lot because it's a pretty common feeling of panic and dread, and they start to believe that if they just had that one other thing, that one other question, that one other piece of information, that would make the difference. And I've referred them to a video that I've linked to in this in the show notes today. It's a classic. It's from The Wizard of Oz. And the excerpt is called Brains, Courage, and Heart. You know the scene. It's the one where the wizard is talking to Dorothy and her friends and telling them that the things they've been seeking all along, they already had. They already possessed all of those things. They just didn't have the talisman, the proof of it. And so he gives them a talisman, a piece of paper, a ticking clock, an oil kettle, a set of ruby red slippers. But they didn't need any of those things. Those were just the physical manifestations of what they already had within them. I often suggest to my students, in my most wizard-like way, that what they want and need is a talisman. They need some physical representation of the successes they've had in their life. I had a great story this week with one of my students. She's a student who was raised in the Bronx in New York. I think her parents are from Puerto Rico. She went through school and then joined the Air Force. She enlisted and she worked her way up and then eventually became commissioned, rose to the rank of major. Along the way, she went to school, graduated, went to law school, graduated law school, fought a huge cancer scare, overcame that, got out of the military with the rank of major, and was taking the bar. But she was struggling and had been struggling on the bar exam and had repeated what she described as failures. Well, we were talking about the block, and she was sort of feeling blocked about her inability to type quickly enough. And I started talking to her and asking her if she had any medals or ribbons from her time in the military. And she said, yes, she had a lot of them. And I said, well, what would happen if you took one of those medals and you put it on your desk before you typed your next essay? She said, well, I'll give that a try. Now, she said she went into her closet and she found her uniform and pulled off one of the ribbons that was representative of a medal that she had earned. And she took it and put it in her hands and just sort of looked at it and then sat it next to her computer. She said what happened next was pretty amazing. She sat down to write an essay, and in 60 minutes, she wrote over 1,100 words. This was from someone who could not type more than 800 or 900 words at best previously. She came back to me. She was beaming. She was so excited. And I said, well, how did that happen? Why did that happen? And she said, well, it felt like a light went on for me. I realized I'm capable of doing all of these amazing things. And I've done them all my life. And she started telling me her life story, a little bit more of it. And it was truly remarkable. And I thought, well, this is such a great story, because this is precisely what is often necessary. Just that talisman, that reminder that you're capable or talented. Maybe it's a little trophy you won, or big trophy you won in sports, or maybe it's a recording of a recital that you made, or whatever it is. It doesn't really matter what the item is. It's just a physical reminder that you already have within you everything that you need. And when you have that perspective, oh my gosh, it changes everything. You can do things you didn't think you could do before. And if you want just a little quick boost, go watch The Wizard of Oz, Brains, Courage, and Heart. It's a 5-minute excerpt. It's classic. It's wonderful. And I definitely relate to the guy with Behind the Curtain. So there you go. So that was number 4. You already have everything you need. Don't be out searching for things that you don't need, and certainly use a talisman if it helps you. And then perspective number 5, this is a big one, is that it's your choice. What happens over the next 2 weeks is ultimately your choice. Now, I started this episode today by talking about our webinar, How to Make the Next Bar Exam Your Last Bar Exam, and we subtitled that as the 4 powerful steps to pass the bar. One of those steps deals with this idea of responsibility, about it being your choice. And in the webinar, I talk about the fact that taking responsibility means being responsible for the outcomes that you want, taking full responsibility for the outcomes you want. Well, here's the reality. Many people going into the bar at this point, with 2 weeks to go, perceive themselves as victims. They see themselves as victims of a system that's unfair. They see themselves as victims of their law schools, of the bar examiners, of the employment market, of the debt structure that they're under, and all of that has validity. However, none of it is helpful for the purposes of passing the bar. The people who pass the bar exam, and this is true universally, but the people who pass are the people who take responsibility for their own outcomes. They are not the people who go to the exam feeling like they're victims. You see, victims have no control in their lives. They have no ability to measure or to influence the outcome because they are being victimized. If you go to the exam with that mindset that you are a victim, that you are a helpless rag doll being tossed around by the proctors and the examiners, by the whims of the world, you have virtually no chance of being successful, no matter how hard you worked and how much you did. You must make the mental shift from victimization to being responsible for the outcomes you want. Now, this doesn't mean that you go to the exam and you insist that they pass you. That's not your task. Your task is to perform at the best of your ability. Let the examiners do their job and make the evaluation afterwards, whether that's a passing score or not. That's not your job. Your job is only to go and to do your best work. If you take responsibility for that outcome, then trust me, the examiners will do their job and take responsibility for their part of the task. But I find that people get really confused about this. They either become victims and they just give up. And I've had conversations with people this week who are not in our course who called me and said, well, I'd like to consider taking your course with 2 weeks to go, but, maybe I don't actually think I'm going to pass with this exam, but, I want to just try. Oh, my goodness. I said no to those people because that victimization won't get you anywhere. It just won't work. On the other hand, you cannot go in and say, I demand that you pass me. I demand that you make me a member of the bar. Well, you can demand all you want. That isn't going to change anything. And I've worked with people who believe that somehow they can intimidate the bar examiners or sue the bar examiners or create so much mayhem around it that they'll have to be passed because they are so brilliant. Guess what? Bar examiners don't care. See, it's the wrong responsibility. Your responsibility is just to go to the test and give your best performance over 2 days or 3 days, whatever the test might be. That's the only responsibility that you really have. And if you keep that perspective, then you're going to be much more effective in the work that you do leading up to the exam. On the other hand, if you really believe that you're not going to pass, if you believe that it's an unfair system and it's an unfair test and it's an unfair system of preparation and everyone's out to get you and you have no chance and no hope, well, stay home. Stay home. You will not pass the exam. You've already determined that outcome, and the examiners don't need to do anything except ratify it. See, the way that you approach the test makes all the difference. Taking responsibility for your results would be crazy, but taking responsibility for doing the best work you can do is perfectly rational and perfectly appropriate. So, those are the 5 things that I think you can do to keep perspective a couple weeks before the bar. Remember that 2 weeks is a very long time. Recall that nothing has changed. The exam is stable. Also recognize that you are not the center of the universe. You have everything already that you need, and it's your choice to be a victim or to be responsible. If you do those things, I think you can make the next 2 weeks really productive, really healthy, and really useful as you prepare for the bar exam. Now, next week we'll come back with our final message right before the test for those of you taking the February exam. So much appreciate that so many of you listen and comment and give me your feedback on these podcast episodes. If you haven't subscribed, I encourage you to do that. As I say, you can go to our website and subscribe there, or in iTunes Radio, or iTunes, or in iHeartRadio. And we would love to have you join us along the extra mile. And as I say so often when we're doing these podcasts, I really wish all the best for every one of you listening. And I look forward to seeing all of you on the pass list soon. Thanks, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks for listening to the Extra Mile podcast for bar exam takers at www.celebrationbarreview.com.